Welcome to this beginner's tutorial on how to use the new Unreal Editor for Fortnite, also known as Creative 2.0. With this new powerful tool, anyone can create and publish their own custom games within the Fortnite world. And the best part, creators can even earn a share of the revenue from the games that they publish using this program. Unreal Editor for Fortnite is designed to be beginner friendly, so even if you're new to game development, you can easily create immersive experiences, fun mini games, or really anything else that you can imagine. In this tutorial, I'll guide you through everything you need to know step by step on how to get started. First, I'll show you how to download and install the Unreal Editor for Fortnite, and then we'll cover the basics of navigating around the user interface and all the basic controls. You'll learn how to create custom islands, sculpt landscapes to create the perfect setting for your game. I'll also teach you how to use custom 3D models and assets to bring your game to life. Once your game is ready, we'll cover how you can playtest your level and make any necessary tweaks. Finally, I'll show you how you can publish and share your island with other players, including your friends on different platforms such as console. With the Unreal Editor for Fortnite, the possibilities are endless, so whether you're a seasoned game developer or just getting started, let's go ahead and dive in and start creating. Now, before we get into the video, if you guys are interested in creating games inside of Unreal Engine 5, I recommend you check out my Unreal Engine 5 multiplayer survival game course, link in the description below, where I show you how to make a complete survival game from start to finish. Inside of Unreal Engine 5, we create things like an inventory system, building system, where you can raid other players, you can chop down trees, collect resources. There's almost over 40 hours of content. I'm still adding more and more lectures, and if you enroll today, you'll get an early access discount. The price of the course will be raised later on, so make sure you guys don't miss out. Check the link in the description below, or head over to smartpoly.teachable.com to learn more. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to go ahead and download Unreal Editor for Fortnite or Creative 2.0. So to do that, you're going to need to go ahead and download the Epic Games launcher. This is the same launcher that you use to play games like Fortnite, so you may or may not already have it downloaded, but if you don't, you just want to follow the link in the description below or head over to epicgames.com to download the Epic Games launcher. And of course, if you don't have an account, you'll need to create one. So once you go ahead and download and install the Epic Games launcher, the very first time that you launch it, it's going to look like this. So you may or may not already be familiar with the Epic Games launcher. But if you head over to the Store tab on the left here, you're going to see we have right here on the front page, Unreal Editor for Fortnite brings the power of Unreal Engine to the scale of the Fortnite audience. So all you need to do to go ahead and download is click on this, get it now. It'll go ahead and pull up the page here. So as you can see, some of the different features of the editor, some of the cool things that you can create using the Unreal Editor for Fortnite. So if you don't have this downloaded, what you want to do is click on here. It says free. It's going to have a button that says either checkout or download. So I'll just click on that, and then it will take you to a page to go ahead and download it. And you'll just click confirm and install. Now, in addition, if you don't have Fortnite downloaded, it'll also go ahead and download Fortnite, because you actually need the base game to playtest the games and islands that you create inside of the editor. So it'll go ahead and automatically download the base game. That way you'll be able to playtest your maps. So now that we have it downloaded, you want to head over to your library. And in your library, you're going to see the Unreal Editor for Fortnite. So all you have to do to launch it is click on here, launch, and we'll go ahead and start launching the editor. So if this is your very first time opening up the Unreal Editor for Fortnite, this is what it's going to look like. You're going to see this little splash screen that says, Unreal Editor for Fortnite, and it has a couple of different links. So you have a link here to your first hour. So this is just a basic tutorial. And we have a couple of other links here to the documentation. So if you guys want to learn more, there's just a couple of quick links. You can click done here, or you can click the X, either way. And then it's going to pull up what's called this project browser. Okay. So this is the first thing that you're going to see when you open it up. And you want to go ahead and just ignore what you see in the background here. Right now, we're just focusing here on this project browser. So the project browser is what we use to create new projects, new maps or islands, and also open existing projects that we've previously created. So if this is your very first time opening this up, you're not going to see any new projects in your My Projects tab. Now, since I've already used this program, you can see that I already have a couple of different projects that I've created. So I have a couple of different projects here. You can see the name of the project, just My Project, Temperate Island 1, Verse Test. So this is in the My Projects tab. Above that, we have, again, the links to getting started, documentation, and community. So these are just, again, some quick links to if you want to learn more. Down here, we have island templates. So if you click on this, this will show you all the different templates that we can create a project from. So as you can see, we have things like a simple template. So this is a very simple level with a few different props. Here we have a blank template, so you can see it's just a flat, empty world. And then we have some different islands that you can pick from. So we have Tilted Towers Island, Greasy Grove Island, Survival Island, Balanced Island with limited resources, Empty Survival Island, so Survival Island with no trees or rocks or anything like that. So as you can see, there's a lot of different templates that you can pick from. We have a mountain range. We have this extra large grid island. So again, another flat open world. We have different floating islands, meadow island, shoreline, canyon, volcano. Just so many different templates that you can pick from. So if you want, you can pick a template that you want to create your game. In my case, I'm going to scroll all the way up and choose maybe this, Greasy Grove Island. And now with this selected, we have here in the bottom right, we have our project name. So you can select this and rename your project. So this will be the name of your game or map that you want to create. So in my case, I'm just going to name this to Beginner Tutorial. So you can name this to whatever you want. And then once you're finished, you just click Create. And it will go ahead and create the project from the template that we selected. Now, depending on your computer's speed, it might take, a couple of minutes for it to load. So just be patient with it loading up. So once you're finished loading in, this is what it's going to look like for the very first time that you open it up. And I'm going to cover everything that you see here on the screen. So if this is really intimidating or overwhelming, you don't have to worry because I'll walk you through everything step by step. So the very first thing that I'm going to talk about is what you see here in the center of the screen, which is called the viewport. So the viewport is where you can move around and navigate within the scene or within your level. And so to do that, you just hold down the right click on your mouse button, and this allows you to look around. So if you hold down the right mouse button, you can move your camera in your viewport in any direction. So we can look up in the sky, we can look down, and then if you use the WASD keys, you can use these keys to move in any direction. So we can move down here, and we could also move up and navigate using WASD and right mouse button to look around. So these are the very basic controls inside of our viewports to move around. So you can see right now I'm moving fairly slow, and we can either speed up how fast we move based on our speed. So if you hold down right click and move around, you can scroll up with your mouse wheel. So if you scroll up with your mouse wheel, that will make you move a lot faster. You can also scroll your mouse wheel down, and that will make you move a lot slower. So again, if you hold down right click and move around, if you use the mouse scroll wheel up, that will make you move faster. If you use the mouse scroll wheel down, that will make you move slower. Now, also in the viewport, you can see that you can click on certain things. So if I click on this tree, what you're going to see is now this tree is highlighted. So you can see it has this orange or yellow highlight around it. So I can also select this rock, and I can move over here. You can see that this rock is selected, it's outlined, and we also get this little movement gizmo. So I'll talk about this here in a second. But as you can see, we can select different objects inside of our viewport, and you can see it highlight depending on whichever object we have selected. Okay, now inside of our viewport, there's a couple of different buttons that I just want to go over quickly. So up here at the top, we have a couple of different buttons. So the very first thing, we have this little menu. You can do things like show or hide your frame rate. So if you want to show your frame rate, you can click on the show FPS. That will just show you how many frames you're getting inside of your game. And you can uncheck that to hide it. There's also a couple of other settings that you can mess around with in here. Next to it, we have perspective. So this changes what view you want to view your level. So for example, if I were to change this from perspective to top, that gives us a top-down view where I can scroll in and out using my mouse wheel. It gives us a top-down view of our map and of our level. I can also hold down right-click, and that will allow me to pan around. Okay, so I can scroll in and out, pan around. You can also select different objects in this view mode. So this is really useful for if you're trying to align things up, and if you're trying to make a building or lay out your level in a certain way where you need to be a little bit more precise. You can also change this from top to bottom view or left view, so you can get a left view of your level. So you can see some of the houses here, some of the trees, and again you can select objects, scroll in and out, and use your right mouse button to move around. So we can change this back to perspective. It'll put us back in our normal view mode where we can move around inside of the viewport. Next up, we have the different view modes. So we have the default lit. So as you can see, this has, the lighting, the shadows, and all that stuff. We can change this to unlit, and what that will show us is it will show us a unlit view. Basically, there's no sun or no lights. And so this is actually really useful if you don't have the greatest PC, if you don't have a really good computer to run the editor, because this will instantly give you a boost in your frame rate, and it's just really useful, and it will help you with performance if you don't have the greatest computer. Next up, we have wireframe, which we saw a little bit earlier before. So this kind of gives you an X-ray view of your level. So you can see, we can kind of see through the buildings and kind of get this X-ray view of all of the buildings and objects placed in our level. Down below wireframe, we have a couple of other different view modes, but for now we're just going to move on. So I'm going to change this back to the default lit mode. Next, we have show. So you can show and hide different things. I'm not going to really cover this for now. To the right of that, we have time of day. So you can change the time of day, and what that will do is if we take this little slider, you're going to see that it changes the time of day from 12 o'clock, and we can put the sun down so it's nighttime. We'd also change this to say like a sunset, so we can put the sun setting or the sun rising in the horizon. So you can change the time of day, and it will affect the lighting in the scene and really allow you to customize the type of look that you're going for in your level. To the right of that, we have scalability. So if you click on this, this will allow you to change your settings inside of the editor. So again, if you don't have the greatest computer, you can change your quality from low, medium, high, or epic, depending on how good of a computer that you have. If you're not getting really good performance, you can change this to medium or even low. Okay, now over here on the right, we have project size. So it just shows you how big the project is in terms of, megabytes or gigabytes. So right now we don't have to worry about that. And then next up, all of these little buttons, I'm going to explain here in a second, but they have to do with when we select objects in our level. So for example, if we head back over to this rock, when I select this rock, or when I select even this tree, what you're going to notice is we have this little arrow gizmo. Now this little arrow gizmo has, 3 different arrows. We have a green arrow, a blue arrow, and a red arrow. And if you left click and drag one of these arrows, so for example, I'm dragging this red arrow, what you're going to notice is I can move this rock around. Okay, I can move it, back and forth. So I can take the green arrow, I can even move it back and forth like this. I can even take this blue arrow and it'll allow me to move it up and down like this. Okay. Now these arrows are the different axes in a 3D space. So for example, if you look in the bottom left of the viewport, we have the same exact 3 arrows that we see right here. And you can see that they have a letter assigned to them. So we have the x-axis for this red arrow. We have the z for this blue arrow. And then we have the y for this green arrow. Okay? So when I grab this red arrow, we can move it on the x. If I grab this green arrow, we can move it on the y. And if I grab this blue arrow, we can move it on the z. Okay? So these letters are just related to which arrow or which axes to the direction we're moving this object in. Okay? So we have our movement gizmo. Now if you look up here in the top right, we have select and translate objects. If we click on this button to the right of it, you can see it says select and rotate objects. And if we select that, it will give us this different rotation gizmo. So this is the rotation gizmo. And now you can see we still have the different colors. We have our green, red, and blue. But if we left click and drag, you can see we can rotate it now. We can rotate it on the Y, on this green. We can rotate it on the Z, or on the blue axis. And we can also rotate it on the red, or on the X axis. So you can see we have this rotation. So you can rotate this rock around, say if you want it laying on its side like this. And then you can switch back to the movement, so we can move this down like so. So you can switch to the rotation if you want to rotate it. You can switch back to the movement gizmo if you want to move it around. So that is our rotation. If you head to the right of that button, we have another gizmo. So this one is for scaling objects. So now we have a blue box, a red box, and a green box. And if you left click and drag, say the green box, you can see that we can scale this object in the Y. And then we can also select the red box and we can scale it in the X. Or we can select the blue box and scale it in the Z. So this will scale it up like so. Okay? So just left click and drag and that will scale it in whichever direction that you want. Now another thing that you can do is if you hover over your mouse cursor in the center, you can scale this entire thing up uniform or in all axes at the same time. So if you want to scale this up and not in just one direction, just hover over the center, and this will allow you to scale the entire thing up at the same time. So again, we have the scale gizmo. You can switch over to the rotation gizmo if you want to rotate the rock. We can switch back over to the movement gizmo if we want to move the rock around. And these even have hotkeys associated with them. So if you press E on your keyboard, it will give you the rotation gizmo. If you press R on your keyboard, it will get you the scale gizmo. And if you press W, it will give you the movement gizmo. So again, that's W to get the movement gizmo, E to get your rotation, and R to get the scale. Okay, the next thing that we're going to talk about are these next couple of buttons that we see here. So let's go ahead and head over here to this little playground. And we have this fence that goes around the playground. So if you select one of the fences, you're going to see that we have it highlighted. And we also have our movement gizmo right here. So if I take this movement gizmo, I can move it around just like we normally would. And what you're going to notice is every time I move it, it snaps to this grid. So I'm not able to move this fence. Like say I wanted to move it right here, right in the center of this road. You're going to see that we're not able to move it to that position, and it's just snapping, and I'm not able to position it in the middle like so. So that has to do with the snapping. So the snapping allows you to snap certain objects to a grid. In our case, it's snapping it to this invisible grid that you see here. And this is super useful for if you're building, say, a building. So for example, if I were to take a piece of this wall and move it up, you can see that it automatically snaps. And so this is really useful for creating buildings. But for me, for placing this fence, I want to place it in this center position, and it won't allow me to do that. To actually be able to place it freely, all you have to do is we can disable the snapping. So to disable the snapping, we over here on our movement, we can uncheck that, and now we're able to move this freely. Okay? So I can move this into the center, and I can drag this to anywhere I want on the map. Okay? It's no longer going to snap. If I wanted to re-enable the snapping, I could check this like so, and when it's blue, that means that now it's snapping. And now you're going to see that's going to start snapping back to the grid. Okay? So I can disable it, and disabling the snapping will allow me to move this fence to wherever I want and position it wherever I want. Now if I press E, so if I change this to our rotation tool, it's going to be the same thing. So if I rotate this, you're going to see that it snaps again to this grid. So I can only rotate this 90 degrees. So for example, I can only rotate it right here, in this position, or in this position. So I'm not able to rotate it in sort of a weird angle. And again, that has to do with the snapping. To disable the rotation snapping, you just uncheck this little button, and now if I press E to rotate, I can rotate this smoothly, and you can see I can rotate it at a weird angle if I want to place this fence sort of like this. Okay? Again, you can re-enable the snapping if you want to rotate it and have this snap 90 degrees like so. Okay? Lastly, we have our scaling snapping. So if I press R, and if you look really closely, you can see that I can scale it up like that. And it's sort of not giving me a very precise scale. And so that has to do with the snapping. So if I disable the snapping by clicking that little button, now I can scale this very smooth. And you can see I can precisely scale this to whatever size that I want. Okay? So we can re-enable the snapping, and that will kind of give us a scale snapping to give us an even scale like so. Okay? Now if we wanted to undo what we just did, we can click Control Z. Control Z on your keyboard will undo all the changes that we did to this fence. So we'll go ahead and unrotate the object and put it all the way back to where we started. So it looks like it will save it all the way back to here, but we can just enable the grid snapping, and then we can just move the fence back to its original location like that. Okay? So we have the different snapping tools. We also have here this little camera icon, and this has to do with our camera speed. So for example, if I change this down to 1, you're going to see if I try to move around in the viewports, I'm moving at a very slow pace. If I increase this all the way up to 8, you can see that I can really zoom around the level. And this is really useful if you have a really large map and you need to get across the map. But generally, you can leave this on 4, which is, the default speed. And of course, you can also adjust your camera speed by using the scroll on your mouse wheel. Scroll up to speed up, scroll down to move a little bit slower. Okay? So the very last button on our viewport is this little box with a cross in it. So if you click on that, what you're going to see is we have our normal view down here. And then up here, if you scroll out, you can see we have a back view, a right view, and a top view of our map or our level. So this is really useful if you're trying to design, buildings, or if you're trying to lay out your level to get sort of a precise layout. This is a really useful view where you can view all sides of it. That way it'll help you lay out objects in your level. Now you can get back to your normal view by clicking on this box, and now we'll go ahead and maximize our default viewport right here. So now let's talk about basic controls inside of our viewport. We already went over our little gizmo controls that allow us to move and rotate certain objects. Now let's talk about copy pasting objects, deleting objects, and undoing or redoing what we did. So let's go ahead and select part of this building, and say we wanted to add an extra part of this wall, and maybe delete the fences that we have here and add this wall and extend it out right here. So we can select objects and delete them by simply selecting them and clicking delete key on our keyboard. So say I wanted to delete these fences, and then I wanted to take part of this wall, and I want to copy and paste it right here to extend this like so. So the way that you can do that is if you select the wall, you can click Control C and then click Control V on your keyboard, and what that will do is it will go ahead and paste the wall like so. Okay? So I could paste it another time. I can Control C and Control V, and that will go ahead and paste it again. So you can just select it and move it out. So as you can see, I copied and pasted this wall 2 times. And of course, you can select and delete them if you didn't want to copy and paste it. So say I wanted to, again, copy, paste the wall and move it up like here. And maybe I want to move it over and press E to rotate that 90 degrees. So I want to kind of, box this part in. So again, we can copy, Control C and Control V to paste, move that over. And now we've replaced that fence part with this wall. Say we didn't like the changes that we made, we can undo that by hitting Control Z on our keyboard, and that will undo the previous thing that we did. So you can see it undid the rotation, undid the move, undid the copy paste, and we can keep pressing Control Z until it goes back as far as it can. So you can see that it goes all the way back to before I deleted these fences. Okay, so again, that's Control Z to undo, Control C and Control V to copy paste, and then you have the delete key to delete certain objects. So those are really all the basic controls, and that's really all you need to know to start creating or designing a level. You can easily start building and copying, pasting to expand certain objects and start laying out buildings and props inside of your level. Now we've just covered the viewport, and next up I'm going to cover over some of the other different parts of the editor, such as this top part up here where you have your file and edit options, and then we'll move on to explain some of these other windows that you see down here on the bottom right. So first things first, let's go ahead and cover this part up here. Basically, we have our file and edit options. So under the file, we have things like create a new level, open a level. We also have recent levels. So if you've made other levels, you can open them through there. And then down here, we have save options. So we have a file save all. So usually when you're working on your game, you want to make sure you come in and do a file save all every now and then. That way you don't lose your work. And then we have things like open a new project and exit. Next up we have the edit, so you can undo and redo changes. You also have things like cut, copy and paste, so all of the same controls. Under here we have window, so these are the different windows that we can show, and you don't really have to worry too much about all the different windows. But basically, say for example I close this window by accident, so I click the X, I can go back to window, and I can even go to load layout default editor layout, and that will just reset everything back to normal. That way, if you accidentally close a window or you mess something up, you can always go back to your window and load the default layout. Next up, we have things like tools. Not a whole lot of stuff in here. Verse, we'll cover this later on in this tutorial, but basically it's the programming language that you use to create logic so you can program certain events inside of your game. Okay, after that we have build, select, and help. So I don't really use any of these other tabs. In the help tab, you have some links to the documentation and controls and all that stuff. Down below it, we have the name of the level that we have open. So this level is called Beginner Tutorial. Our project is also called Beginner Tutorial. We have the save button right here. So this just does a current save. We have the selection mode. So we'll cover that in a second. But right now we're in the selection mode, and this is what allows us to select certain objects. To the right of that, we have project. So this is, create a new project, project settings, and then down here under the creator portal, we have things like publish our project or open up the creator portal. To the right of that, we have this cube plus icon, and this allows us to add content inside of our level. So we'll cover this here in a second, and some of these. But as you can see, we have things like lights, so we can place in, point lights. We can also place in basic shapes like a cube, a sphere, cylinder. We have things like visual effects, cinematics, and all sorts of stuff. To the right of that, we have verse. So again, I'll cover this later on in the video, but basically verse is the programming language that you use inside of the Unreal editor for Fortnite. Then we have this launch session. So the launch session allows us to actually play test our game. And let's go ahead and actually click on that. So if you click on launch session, it will start to load up the session. Now, since we have sort of a medium-sized map, it might take, a couple of minutes for it to load the first time. So what it's going to do is it's going to launch Fortnite. And so it's actually going to run the game and launch it like you normally would if you were to, go and open up Fortnite. So it's just going to take a couple of minutes to load. And depending on, how good your computer is, it might take a little bit longer. But now we're finally loaded in. So this is our little player spawner. This is where we spawn in. And basically we can run around the map that we were just in, and it basically launches the entire game inside of Fortnite. So if I press escape, you can see, we have things like our settings, our friends, all the stuff you normally see. And to exit out of this, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to press escape, go on the settings, and I'm going to change this to windowed, so make sure that it's set to windowed. And then I can set this to 1280 by 720. And if I hit apply, we're going to have our game in this windowed mode. So this is just make it easier. That way we can just exit out of here. So we can just press escape and then hit this little X button, click confirm, and we'll go ahead and close that session of our map. Okay, so that's how you play test your actual map. Okay, so now let's move on, and we're going to talk about this window right here. So this window is called the outliner. And basically what you're going to notice is it has a little window that you can scroll. And every time that I select an object, so say I want to select this slide, you're going to see that it highlights inside of this outliner. So if I select this trash can, you can see it says Apollo Coastal Garbage Can. If I select this bush, it says Apollo Hedge Straight. So every time I select something inside of the level, say this part of the road, you can see that we're actually selecting something in this world outliner. Now we can also select stuff inside of here, so if you click on it, you can see that we're selecting that S elevation ground, and it's selecting it and showing us what we're selecting inside of our viewport. So the outliner basically just shows us all of the different objects that are inside of our viewport. And so you can select objects inside of your viewport, or you can select them inside of your outliner. You can even search for items. So if I want to search for garbage, I can search for all the garbage cans on the map. And then I can even, if I click on this and if I press F inside of the viewport, it will allow me to focus in on that item. So say I want to select this garbage can right here, which is over by this little bus station. So if I press F, it will allow me to focus in on that object. Okay? So the outliner is really useful if you want to search for certain objects or models inside of your game. Again, you could search for something like tree, and then you can see all the trees inside of your level. You can also select multiple objects inside of your outliner. So if you hold down Shift, you can select multiple objects by holding down Shift and clicking. And then you could even delete from here. So I could do delete, and that would remove all the trees that I just selected. Okay, so I'm going to do Control Z to undo that. But basically that is how the World Outliner works. Now you're also going to see this little red checkbox. And basically what that means is whenever we make a change to an object, we're going to have that little red checkbox. That just means that it's going to make sure that it saves it next time we hit the save button. Okay. Now that is the outliner, very basic, but it lists all of the different objects in our scene. Below it, we have the details. So what the details shows us is, again, if we go in and say we select our trash can, what you're going to see in the details is going to show us the exact name of this object. So it's called Apollo Coastal Garbage Can. And then down here, we can see things like transform. So we have our location, rotation, and scale. So if you look closely at the rotation, we have a red, a green, and a blue value here. And what you'll notice is the red corresponds with this X arrow, or this red arrow, or the X-axis. Our green corresponds with our green arrow, or our Y-axis, and our blue value here corresponds with the blue arrow, or the Z-axis. So we can change values here. If you click and drag, you can see that we can change the value of the Z location, and it will move the trash can up and down. So this is really useful if you want to set the location of an object. You can do it through here, and you can set the location. You can also set the rotation. So say I wanted to rotate this 90 on the X-axis, I could do 90, and now you're going to see that it rotates at 90 degrees. Okay. Now every time you do a change or change the values inside of here, you're going to see this little back arrow. Now this is very common. You're going to see this all the time. But basically, if you click on that little back arrow, it resets it to the default value. So the default value in this case is 0, 0, 0. If I set this to 90, it will show that little arrow. And if I just click on that arrow, it just resets it back to normal. Okay? Down here we have our scale. So again, we can set the values. Say we want to set this to 5, and then 5, and then 5. And if you click off, it will go ahead and apply that. But as you can see, we just set our scale of our trash can to 5, 5, and 5. And then you can again click that arrow to undo the changes that you just made. Okay? So underneath the transform, we have a couple of other options. So you see we have things like, play bounce. So the little bounce that it plays when you hit the object. There's again some other settings in here. I'm not going to go over all the different settings, but basically the details panel shows you all of the details and settings based on whichever object you select. So if I select this little bush or hedge, it's going to show the name of it, Apollo hedge straight _C, and then it shows things like the details, like the location, rotation, and scale. So basically the details panel just shows you extra information about the object that you have selected, and sometimes it has different settings that you can change inside the details to customize that object. Okay, so that is the details panel. Lastly, what we have is this bottom bar right here. So this bottom area is called the content drawer. So if you click on this, it'll pop open a window, and if you click anywhere else inside of your viewport, it will go ahead and hide that window. So again, click on this content drawer button, and it will pull up this content drawer. Now the content drawer is where you can drag in assets or 3D models or objects from your content drawer inside of your game. So here is where you're going to store all the 3D models and everything that you're going to use to actually build your game. So what you're going to see here right now is we have, our Fortnite game, and we have these little folders. So we have our beginner tutorial content. So currently we're inside of this little folder, and we have these 3 different files. So these are different files inside of our content drawer. So this first one is a level. Okay, so you can see if I hover over it, it says beginner tutorial level. Okay, so this is currently what we have open. Right, a level is basically a map that you can play inside of. Then next to this, we have some other different files, and you can hover over the file to see what type of file it is. But I'm not going to cover over every file type in this tutorial, only the very basic ones that you need to be familiar with. Okay, so again, we have our level, which we are currently inside of. Next up, we have these other folders inside of here. So if you go below it, we have Fortnite, the Fortnite folder. And now you're going to see we have a ton of different folders inside of here. So we have things like consumables, devices, environment, lighting, materials, meshes, props, sounds, weapons. So if we go to things like devices, you're going to see that we have a ton of different stuff in here. We have things like a vehicle spawner, audio player, campfire, button, boat spawner, pretty much everything that you normally would be able to use inside of, Fortnite Creative. And now what you can do with all these devices is you can actually drag and drop them inside of the level. So for example, if I wanted to take this ATK spawner, I can drag and drop it. And now what you're going to see is we just dragged and dropped in this little spawner for this little golf cart. And now we can move this around. We have our little movement gizmo. And so say I wanted to move it over here, we could just move it right over to this location. And then, we could rotate it 90 degrees if we wanted it to be, lined up like this. And we could also take in some other things that we want. So, we have things like a campfire. We have a dirt bike spawner. So there's just a ton of different stuff inside of the devices. If you go back, you can go back by clicking this Fortnite folder here, or you can also go back by clicking the folder here, and that will pull us back to all of the different files. So we have other different things like props. So you can see there's a ton of different props. We can click on, say, this castle folder, and now we can see all the different props for making a castle. So for example, we have this ice castle door. So if I drag and drop this inside the level, you can see we just dragged and dropped this castle door 3D mesh, and we can actually use this to build a building if we wanted to. So I can go back to my content drawer and scroll down till we find a wall. So we have ice castle wall 2. So if I drag this into the level, you can see that it automatically snaps to that grid because we have our grid snapping enabled. And then if we copy paste, so Control C, Control V, you can move this over and press E on our keyboard to rotate. Rotate this 90 degrees. Press W to get our movement gizmo back, and move this back over here. Okay? So basically the content drawer allows us to drag in 3D models, different devices such as vehicles, sounds, props, all sorts of different stuff, and we can just drag and drop it inside of our level and start building our level and creating our game. So again, we can go back all the way up to Fortnite, and there's just a ton of different stuff in here, and we can go to another folder. So this prefabs folder, if you double click this, you can see again we have a ton of different assets inside of here. And so if we click on this castle folder, you can see that we have all the prefabs pretty similar to what you have inside of normal Fortnite Creative, where you can drag in a preset like this fully completed building here, and we can just drag this entire thing into our level. And after you're done dragging it in, you can see that we can select the individual meshes that make up this prefab, And we could even go ahead and delete some of this. So I could say I want to delete that part of the wall. I could delete all of that if I wanted to. And you can go in and basically just customize this to whatever you want. So I'm going to undo all this. So just press Ctrl Z on your keyboard to undo. So we'll undo me dragging this into the scene like so. So that is our content drawer. There's also a couple of other options that we can do in our side of our content drawer. If you head back inside of our beginner tutorial content, we can right click. And if you right click inside of the content drawer, you're going to see that we have this little options menu pop up. Okay. So we can do things like import to this folder. So for example, what you can do is you can actually import your own custom 3D models inside of the Unreal Editor for Fortnite. So say you wanted to 3D model your own weapon or vehicle or something like that, you can actually import those models into your game. Okay. We have other things like create a new folder. So if I wanted to create a new folder, I could add a new folder like that. I can also right click and delete that folder like so. If we right click in here again, we have a couple of different things that we can create. We can create things like a level, material. Then down here we have some other different assets that we can create. And again, I'm not going to go over every single asset that you can create inside of the editor. For now, we're just going over the basic ones that you need to know about. Okay, so that is our content drawer. There's one more thing that you can do inside of here, which is you can click this dock and layout button. So if you click on that, what it does is now if I move around inside of the viewports, our content drawer is not going to disappear. It's going to stay right here. And we can even take this little window and move it up or down like so. Okay, so this is really useful for when you go to, say the Fortnite folder. If I go to the props, castle, now I can just drag in assets, and this window won't go away if I click something in our viewport. Okay, so this is very useful for when you start designing and laying out your level, because you can have your content drawer open all the time. Okay, now if you want to hide your content drawer, all you have to do is click on this little X, and you don't have to worry, it's still down here. So if you click back here, you can see that we still have our content drawer. And again, all you have to do is click this dock and layout. It will automatically snap it here so that you have it shown at all times. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and create ourselves a new level. So to create a new level, you can either right click and add a new level, or you can go to File and add a new level. So I'm going to go to File and click this new level. And now what it's going to show us is all the templates that we saw at the beginning when we actually created our project. And so these levels are basically just different maps that you can create. And so you can have multiple maps inside of your project depending on, what type of game you're making. So I'm going to go ahead and pick, say, this shoreline island. That way we have, a little blank island that we can start building our game on. We can start dragging assets into and designing our level. So I'm going to choose shoreline asset and click create. It's going to ask us to save all the changes that we did, all the stuff that we modified. So just click save selected, and then once it's done, it will go ahead and load up. And so it might take a second for it to load up, and you can see preparing shaders. So now if we go ahead and zoom out, we can see that we have this nice little island that we can actually start building our game in. So next up, I want to cover landscapes. So landscapes are basically what you see right here. So this little island is a landscape. So if you click on it, you're going to see that we have this little square. So this square is our landscape, okay? And you can see in the outliner, you can see that we have landscape selected here, okay? So landscapes are really neat because you can sculpt them. You can create mountains, islands, rivers, all sorts of stuff using landscapes. So we're going to go ahead and modify this landscape and show you how you can create things like mountains, valleys, all sorts of stuff. Now, first things first, let's actually save this level. So if we click on the save button, it's going to ask us to save this level that we just created. So we want to save this. We can just leave this as new map. So if we click save, it will go ahead and save our level. And now you'll see it's added down here in our content drawer. So we have our new map that we just created, which is what we are in right now. Okay. So now let's go ahead and mess around with the landscape. So if you select the landscape, we can, up here at the top left, we have a selection mode. So if you hit this drop down, you can see we have selection, and then we have landscape. So if you click on landscape, what this will do is it will load this little window. And now I'm going to close my content browser. So if you click the X, it will show us this full window. And now if you look at our mouse cursor, inside of the viewport, we have this little white circle surrounding it. And if I actually click and hold it down, you can see that we can start to sculpt and create mountains inside of our landscape. So over here on the left, we have our landscape mode, which allows us to do things like sculpt our landscape. Okay. So over here we have the sculpt tab, and right now we have the sculpt tool selected. So this lets us sculpt really big mountains like this. So we can just hold down left click, and this will allow us to add mountains, hills, or whatnot. And if you want to subtract part of this, so say I want to make this little mountain or hill smaller, if you hold down shift, so hold down shift on your keyboard and then click left click, it will go ahead and push that mountain down. And you can also sculpt a little valley like this by holding down shift, and that will create sort of this indent inside of our landscape. Okay, so left click to add, shift, and then left click to subtract. Then we also have other things like smooth. So if I select on smooth, if I left click, you can see that it smooths out this mountain, and it creates sort of this smooth transition, or this really smooth grassy hill. Okay, so we have the smooth tool. We also have things like the flatten tool, and what that will do is if I left click right here, you can see that it creates a nice flat plateau. And this is really good if you want a nice flat area to, say, place a building down or a cliff or something like that. Okay, you can just sculpt out and flatten this out. And then say you wanted to add a path for the player to get back up, because right now the player is not able to climb this cliff. So we can go over to the smooth tool, and then if we click here, we can add a very smooth hill or transition for our player to run up to get to this little cliff area. Okay, so you just have to smooth this out, and that will add sort of this ramp for players to run up to this area. Okay, so there's a couple of other different options in here and other different tools. I'm not going to really go over that. Down here we have things like our tool strength. So how strong do you want your brush to affect the landscape? So if I select my sculpt, I can increase my tool strength all the way up to 1. If I left click, you can see that it sculpts really fast, and I can create mountains, super tall mountains really fast. Okay, so that has to do with our tool strength. If I put this all the way down to say 0.1, if I try and sculpt, you can see it's really slow and precise when I try to sculpt. Okay, so I can do Control Z. If you do Control Z, it will undo all the things that you just sculpted. So the strength determines how strong your sculpting will be. Next, down here we have things like our brush size. So if you increase this all the way, you can see we have a very big brush. So we can create a really big mountain or hill and undo that. We can also create a very small brush. So if I want to do a flatten, I can make a really small, narrow pathway like this by just decreasing our brush size. Okay, then I could take flatten and I could flatten this out if I wanted to flatten this all the way back like this. Okay, so those are our basic landscape tools. We also have things like our paint mode. So we have the sculpt. Sculpt allows us to create mountains and hills, If I head over to the Paint tab, what we're going to see is we can actually paint different materials onto our landscape. So right now we have sort of this grass on our landscape, but down here, if you scroll down, we have different layers. So right now I have gravel selected. So if I left click, what you're going to see is now I can paint this gravel texture or this gravel material onto our landscape. So say I wanted to add a little pathway of gravel up to this little hill that we have. I'm going to first decrease my brush size. So decrease it like so. And then I could add a little pathway that goes all the way up to this little area. And say, we could add like a building or a vehicle spawner or something up here later on. Okay, so there's a ton of different layers. We have mud. So, we can go ahead and paint this. And as you see, the landscape will sometimes turn gray like that when it's just loading. So we'll just have to give it a second. So we have other different things. We have asphalt. So we could paint that on the ground as well. And we have different biomes. So I could do, biome B. I'm not sure which this one is, but doesn't look like it's really anything. Biome A. Doesn't look like that one does anything. Biome C. And then we also have things like sand. So I could paint, sand into this area like so. Now if you want to erase the sand, all you have to do is select the sand and then hold down Shift and left click. And that will go ahead and erase all the sand that we have. Say we want to do it to this gravel. Select the gravel and just hold down Shift and then left click. And then you'll erase the gravel from our landscape. And again, for things like our asphalt, we can select that layer, hold down Shift and then left click and drag, and that will go ahead and erase that from the landscape. Okay, so that's how you use painting with your landscape. And you can really get in and paint, a pathway all the way around your map so that players know which directions to go and all that good stuff. So to exit out of the landscape mode, all you have to do is under this landscape mode, go back into the selection mode. Okay, so this will allow us to select things again, because if we go into the landscape mode, it won't let us select anything, right? If I just try and click on something, you're going to see that it won't let us select like this tree over here because we're in the landscape mode. So we need to go back into the selection mode. That way we can do things like select objects and move them around inside of our scene. Okay, so now we can go ahead and add some buildings and different spawners and stuff like that. So if we go back to our content drawer, I'm going to go ahead and dock this in the layout. And now we can go ahead and go to the Fortnite folder and go to, say, our devices. And we can add things like a vehicle spawner. So we can put one of these things up here, a dirt bike spawner, and pretty much we can go back over here and add some prefabs. And if we go to, say, this Dusty Depot, you can click on that and we can drag in, one of these little, sheds. Right now, if you just leave this selected, I could press E. I'm actually able to rotate it. So say I want to rotate it, I want to turn off the snapping, so I uncheck the snapping. And now I can rotate it like this. I can press W. And right now what you're going to see is I can't move it. I can only move it like this. So our gizmo is not really aligned to our building. Now you can change that if you click on this little icon right here. So if you click on that, now you can see that our little movement gizmo is aligned to our building. So I can move it in this angle. So sometimes when you're moving objects, if your gizmo is like this because you rotated something, you can hit this little globe icon, and this will change the gizmo to orientate it with the local rotation of the building or the global grid. Okay, so this is very useful if you want to, be able to move the building in this direction. Okay, so I think this is a good spot for our building. So say I wanted to remove some of the assets, I could click on maybe I don't want this garage door. I could select it and delete it. And also maybe I want to delete part of the roof, because maybe I just want some light coming into this building. So I'm going to delete part of the roof here. So we have a little bit of light coming through the building. And we can also add some other different props. So if we go to Fortnite, we can go to weapons, and we have all these different weapon spawners. So I got to drag in, assault rifle here. We have a burst SMG, and pretty much all the different weapons that you'd have. So you can scroll through all these and look at the different ones. Okay, so we made this little area of our map. We could add some more buildings to this overall size. So if we head over to our prefabs, we can look for things like our tilted towers folder. And this will have things like, our skyscrapers and things like that. So I could drag in the clock tower, castle tower, dark tilted bank. And basically you can just drag and drop them and move them around where you want. Now if I go over here, you might see that the grass is in the way of this little sidewalk. And the way that we can prevent that from happening is if you change your selection mode to landscape, we can head over to the paint mode, and then I could paint, this asphalt layer. So if I paint it around this entire building, it will stop that grass from coming through the ground and ruining, the sidewalk. Okay? So now we can see we have sort of like this little road. And we can pretty much create sort of a little city by just painting the ground around part of the buildings. That way it kind of looks like, some sort of little road. Okay? And then if you want to go back and select some of your buildings, you want to exit out of the landscape mode, so just go back to selection. Now we can go ahead and modify our buildings and move stuff around, rotate it, scale it, etc. Okay, lastly, the last thing that you want to do is you want to go to your Fortnite folder, and in the devices, you want to search inside of here. So you can search for different things, but what we're going to search for is player. So search for player spawner. So if you search for player spawner, you should have this player spawner. So you want to drag one of these somewhere in your level. That way you have somewhere where the player will spawn in when you hit play. Okay? So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to add a vehicle spawner right next to our player spawner. That way when our player spawns in, they can just get in the vehicle and start driving around. Okay, so now let's go ahead and test this out. So if I click launch session, it's going to ask us to save. So we're going to save our new map. And then it might give us this little warning message. So whenever you see a little icon like this, it means, warning. It says the map you are trying to play is not the default map. The default map is beginner tutorial. Do you want to continue anyway? We can just click yes, okay? And then now it's going to also say the map you're trying to play is not added to this project's map data, which is required to play a map. So do you want to add this to the project's game feature data? We can just click the yes, okay? So that will go ahead and take care of those warning messages for us. So now it's going to start loading up the session, and it's going to load up the Fortnite game with the custom map and game that we just created. Okay, so now we just spawn in, and we spawn in right where our player spawner is at inside of our level. So this is really handy because, we can place this anywhere inside of the level, wherever we want our player to spawn in. Okay, so we have the buildings that we just created and placed down. We also have our vehicle spawner. So I can press E, and we can go ahead and drive this around our little island that we created. And we can even go and drive up this little hill that we sculpted using our landscape tools. So it's a little bit steep, but we can go ahead and drive all the way up here. And now we have things like our weapon spawner. Okay, we can get out. And, we have other different vehicle spawners. We also have our building here. And we can even fly around like you normally would in the normal Fortnite creative mode. Now if you press escape, we can go into settings, and I'm going to set this back to my windowed mode, hit apply, and you can also click start game. So if you have actual game set up, which I'll have to cover in another video, setting up your own custom game mode, you'd click on the start game. Now we'll go ahead and actually launch the game as if you were to spawn in as an actual player playing the map. We have our scoreboard, we have our normal health. We'll go ahead and drive up here and pick up some of the different weapons, and basically all the structures are destructible, pretty much the same as you'd expect. Okay, so now we can click end game, or we can hit the little red X, and this will bring us back to our creative mode. But if we press escape and close out of that, then we can go ahead and return back to our editor here. Now what you'll notice is if you build in creative mode, it will also save the buildings that you place inside of the editor. So this is actually useful because if you want to, you can even place buildings like you normally would if you're more familiar with flying around and placing objects in creative mode versus using the editor like this. Okay, and of course you can select and delete all these if you don't want them in your level, and just do a save all. Okay, the very last thing that I'm going to cover in this tutorial is Verse. So Verse is the programming language of the Unreal editor for Fortnite. Right now it's still in beta, so it's still really early, and there isn't a whole lot of stuff that you can do with it. But basically you can use Verse to create interactions with certain objects. So for example, if a player opens a door, I can use Verse to make, when the player opens that door, I can make 3 enemies spawn inside of the room that they open the door to. So basically Verse allows you to program certain interactions, events, and even your own custom game modes, things like capture the flag. So to get started with Verse, all you have to do is click on this little Verse icon. Okay, so if you click on here, what it's going to pop up for you guys is when you click on this little button, it's going to say Visual Studio Code not found. Go ahead and download Visual Studio Code. So if this is your first time using the Unreal editor for Fortnite, you'll most likely won't have a Visual Studio Code downloaded. So Visual Studio Code is a separate program that you use to actually write the code. Okay, so you'll want to go ahead and download Visual Studio Code. So to do that, you'll want to head over to code.visualstudio.com/download. You can also click the link from that little pop-up window inside of the Unreal editor, but it will take you to this little page, and you'll just download whichever operating system that you have. So for me, I have Windows, so I just click on that, and we'll go ahead and download the installation file. And then once you have it downloaded, it should look like this little blue icon. So you just double click it and run through the installation. Click I accept the agreement, click next. Just go through the installation process, and once you have it installed, it should basically look like this. So it says Visual Studio Code, and you can actually just go ahead and close this. Okay, so if we head back over to the Unreal editor for Fortnite, now that you have it installed, if you click on Verse, it will go ahead and automatically open up Visual Studio Code with our project loaded up. So let's go ahead and actually create our very first simple Verse program. So if we go back to our Unreal editor here, if you go all the way up to the top, we have this little Verse window, this little Verse drop-down menu. So if you click on it, we want to go ahead and under the tools, we want to show our Verse Explorer. So if you click on that, it will pop open a window, and I'm going to take this little window and dock it over here. Okay, so you can take it and drag it out like this, and you can see that when I hover it over here, it will allow us to place the window, and we can switch between our outliner and this Verse Explorer. Okay, so the Verse Explorer basically shows us the different Verse files. So a Verse file, just contains some code or logic that says, hey, if a door opens, spawn, these enemies or whatnot. So to create our very first Verse program or a Verse file, all you have to do is select the beginner tutorial up here, your project, right click, and click add new verse file to project. Okay, so now it'll pull up this little window that says create a verse script. So choose a template. Right now we only have one template, so I think they're going to add more different templates. So we have a verse device. Create a new verse authorized creative device, which can be placed in the level. Okay, so we can create this and place it into our level. So right now we have the device name, so we could change this device name. I could type in, whatever, but I'm going to leave this as hello_world device. And then this preview shows us basically the code that's inside of that file. So if I go ahead and click this create button, what we'll see now is if I click on this little verse icon, it's going to pull up our Visual Studio Code. And now in our file here under beginner tutorial, we should see this hello_world_device.verse. Okay, this is that file that we just created. So it's inside of here, and it's also inside of our Verse Explorer, that new file that we just created, hello_world_device.verse. Okay, so basically verse is what we use to program different interactions, and so this device or this .verse file has some basic code that's written out, and this is essentially just a very simple program. Okay, so if you're not super familiar with programming or anything like that, you don't really have to worry too much about it. Basically, this program, when we place it into our level, so when we drag it into our level on begin play, so when we hit the play button on our game, all this is going to do is print the text hello world. Okay, it's also going to print 2 + 2 equals, and then the answer right here. And so let's go ahead and actually see this and run this code. So the first thing that we want to do to actually run this is we need to go to our verse button right here. So if you click on it, we want to click this build verse code. So click on that, and it will go ahead and build the code. You can see that it was really fast. And then now in our content browser, if you click on this content browser, we should see in our beginner tutorial content a new folder called creative devices. So if we double click that, we now have our little hello world device, our verse class. And if I drag this into our level, you can see that we have this little computer, and this little computer just represents our code being run when we hit the game. Okay, so this is just a little computer model. You can hide this anywhere in the level, it doesn't matter. Okay, you can hide it under the level if you wanted to. But basically, if I go ahead and click our launch session, we're going to get this little warning. The map you're not trying to play is not the default map. We'll just continue anyway. Okay, so we're inside of our game, and now you can see our little device here. So this represents, our code being run, and you can see we can't damage it. So if I click start game, it will go ahead and start the game like if we were to normally join. And if I hit escape and go to my island, we're going to up here at the top click on this little log, and now you're going to see that our program that we just created, the little verse, it printed to this log hello world, and then 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, so we know that our program ran, and if we go ahead and make this back to windowed and go ahead and exit out of this mode, we can go ahead and open up our verse program. So click on the little verse icon and then open up our hello world device. So in our on begin, so when we hit play, basically when we play our game, it prints to the screen hello world, and then it also prints 2 + 2 = 4. So we can even change what this program will print out by just selecting the text here and saying, this is my first verse program. Okay, and then just do Control S or file save, and then we could do something like 4 + 4. Now this is 4 + 4 equals, and then in these parentheses we also need to change this to 4 + 4. Okay, so do file save, And now to update this, we just need to go ahead and go to verse and click build verse code. Okay, so that will just go ahead and compile our code that we just typed in our program. And if we don't get an error, that means that it's all good to go. Then we can go ahead and click this launch session and click OK. Okay, and now that we're inside of here, we have to go ahead and click start game as well. And then we can go ahead and press escape, go to my island, and head over to the log. And now that we can see that it printed off what we just changed in our little program, this is my first program, so it printed that to our log, and it also printed 4 + 4 = 8. Okay, so this is just a very basic example of the verse programming language. There's a lot more stuff that you can obviously do with this, including creating your own custom game modes and programming certain logic and interactions based on what the player does inside of your game. And eventually Epic is going to be updating the verse language, adding more and more different things that you can create. And hopefully later on down the road, you can add things like, custom weapons, vehicles, and things like that using verse and being able to program different things into the game. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. We covered everything from navigation to creating our own custom maps, adding in 3D models and scaling, translating, and moving those models around our scene. We went over landscape sculpting, painting, and adding things like vehicle spawners, as well as diving into a little bit of the verse programming language. So I hope you guys learned a lot inside of this tutorial. Let me know what kind of video you guys want to see next. Do you want a tutorial showcasing how to make, say, like a capture the flag game mode, or to learn more about the verse programming language? Let me know down in the comments down below. If you guys are interested in learning how to make games inside of Unreal Engine, which is actually very similar to the Fortnite editor, check out my multiplayer survival game course, link in the description below, where I teach you how to make a multiplayer survival game. And yeah, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel so you can be updated with the latest news and tutorials. And yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.